From the forgotten pages of history, a chilling question echoes across millennia. Did ancient civilizations possess a horrifying knowledge of biological warfare, or were their most devastating plagues merely unintended consequences, tragic byproducts of brutal siege tactics and the grim realities of conflict? Welcome to Echoes of Time, your portal to the secrets that lie under the dust of centuries, as we delve into the dark, often overlooked annals of military history, exploring the terrifying possibility that disease was intentionally weaponized millennia before modern science understood its mechanisms. We uncover the whispers of contagion that resonate from forgotten battlefields, questioning whether the devastating blights of the past were always acts of nature or sometimes acts of war. For too long, the idea of ancient biological warfare has been dismissed, relegated to the realm of myth or primitive desperation. Yet, the persistent whispers of such practices refuse to be silenced, urging us to look beyond simplistic explanations. This is a journey into the shadows, where the lines between disease, desperation, and deliberate destruction become horrifyingly intertwined, forcing us to confront a forbidden chapter in humanity's unending quest for dominance and survival. For too long, the idea of ancient biological warfare has been dismissed, relegated to the realm of myth or primitive desperation. Yet, the persistent whispers of such practices refuse to be silenced, urging us to look beyond simplistic explanations. This is a journey into the shadows, where the lines between disease, desperation, and deliberate destruction become horrifyingly intertwined, forcing us to confront a forbidden chapter in humanity's unending quest for dominance and survival. The very notion challenges our perceptions of antiquity, suggesting a cunning, if rudimentary, grasp of biological threats long before the microscope revealed the invisible armies of bacteria and viruses. It's a secret that demands to be unearthed, a story that never quite made it into the mainstream history books until now. For centuries, accounts have hinted at the deliberate use of disease-laden tactics, strategies that seem to belong more to a nightmare than to the calculated brutality of ancient conflict. History is rife with incidents that blur the line between barbaric expediency and calculated biological assault, leaving us to ponder the true intentions behind these gruesome acts. Imagine the Scythians, a nomadic people whose ferocity was legendary, dipping their arrows in putrefying corpses, not merely to inflict a wound, but to sow the seeds of a festering illness, to turn a minor injury into a death sentence. Was this simply a means to make their weapons more lethal through sheer savagery, or was there an implicit, perhaps even explicit, understanding of the noxious effects of decay and infection? The very thought sends shivers down the spine, painting a picture of an ancient world where the battlefield extended far beyond the clash of swords and spears, reaching into the very bloodstream of the enemy. Then consider the grand siege engines of empires, tools of immense destruction designed to breach impregnable walls. The Romans, masters of engineering and military strategy, and later the formidable Mongol hordes, were both recorded employing a particularly gruesome tactic, catapulting plague victims over besieged city walls. This was not a random act, but a deliberate deployment of suffering, a macabre payload launched with devastating intent. Was their primary goal merely to terrorize the defenders, to break their morale with the sight of their fallen comrades turned into projectiles of death? Or was there a deeper, more sinister purpose at play, a nascent understanding that these disease-ridden bodies carried an even more potent weapon, the contagion itself? These incidents challenge us to reevaluate what we thought we knew about the sophistication and indeed the ruthlessness of ancient military minds. Such actions were not merely desperate measures. They were, in their own terrifying way, a form of strategic engagement, a weaponization of the very forces of nature against their adversaries. Early historians, viewing these events through the lens of their own era, often dismissed them as primitive, desperate measures born of an age lacking the sophisticated understanding of germ theory that would come much later. They assumed that without knowledge of microorganisms, such acts could not possibly constitute true biological warfare, merely superstitious barbarity. The prevailing wisdom held that true biological warfare required a scientific understanding of pathogens, a level of knowledge far beyond what ancient peoples could possess. This perspective, while understandable, may have inadvertently obscured a crucial facet of ancient military thought, causing us to overlook a profound, albeit empirical, form of biological targeting. The dismissive attitudes of later centuries perhaps served to sanitize history, to distance us from the uncomfortable truth that our ancestors may have been far more cunning and resourceful in their methods of destruction than we previously imagined. Yet, as dust settles on old narratives and new evidence comes to light, a different picture begins to emerge. Archaeological discoveries, meticulously unearthed from forgotten sites, coupled with meticulous reinterpretations of ancient texts, are now suggesting a more cunning, if entirely empirical, appreciation for Contagion's insidious power. These findings compel us to reconsider the dismissals of the past. It's becoming increasingly clear that ancient civilizations, through generations of keen observation, might have developed a practical, if not theoretical, understanding of how disease spread and how it could be exploited. They may not have known about bacteria or viruses, but they certainly understood the deadly link between sickness, decaying matter, and close quarters. This observational knowledge, honed through centuries of warfare and survival, could have been sufficient to inform strategic decisions, transforming mere brutality into a form of calculated biological assault. We are forced to ask, how might these ancient practices, whether inadvertently or purposefully employed, have shaped the course of empires, turning the tide of countless conflicts, and even, in some tragic instances, wiping out entire populations? The echoes of these lost civilizations whisper to us of a power they grasped, a destructive force they unleashed, perhaps without fully comprehending its microscopic origins, but with a clear intent to devastate. But this leads us to the heart of the enigma, a profound debate among historians and scholars. Was it truly biological warfare as we understand it, a deliberate attempt to use disease as a weapon? Or was it simply a byproduct of brutal conflict, an unintended consequence of the chaos and filth of ancient battlefields and sieges? This is where the historical lens sharpens, where the nuances of intent and outcome become paramount. The answers are not simple, and compelling arguments exist on all sides, each forcing us to scrutinize the available evidence from a fresh perspective. The quest to differentiate between an act of nature and an act of war becomes central to understanding this forbidden blight. Some historians argue that the primary aim of actions like catapulting plague victims was psychological terror. The horrific spectacle of disease-ridden bodies being hurled over city walls, the grotesque imagery of death and decay raining down upon the defenders, would undoubtedly have instilled panic and despair. In this view, disease was merely a bonus outcome, a secondary effect that enhanced the already profound psychological impact. The sight alone, they contend, would be enough to break the will of a besieged population, causing them to surrender before the actual pathogens could take hold and wreak widespread devastation. This perspective suggests a more limited, albeit still brutal, form of warfare, focusing on the human mind rather than the human body's vulnerability to microscopic invaders. It argues that the intent was to instill fear and dread, with the actual spread of disease being a welcomed, though not necessarily primary objective. Others contend that a rudimentary observational understanding of contagion allowed for strategic deployment, even without knowing about bacteria or viruses. This viewpoint suggests that ancient military leaders, through empirical observation, recognized that sickness followed close contact with diseased individuals or putrefying matter. They would have seen how plagues ravaged populations and how quickly illness could spread in crowded, unsanitary conditions. From this practical understanding, it's argued, they could have inferred that introducing infected materials or individuals into an enemy stronghold would likely result in an epidemic, weakening the defenders from within. This is where the idea of empirical appreciation for contagion truly comes into play. It implies a shrewd, albeit unscientific, application of observed phenomena to achieve military objectives, transforming gross acts into a form of primitive biological strategy. The very act of targeting the health of an enemy, even if the precise mechanism was unknown, would constitute a deliberate form of biological warfare. A third, equally compelling perspective debates the actual effectiveness of these methods, suggesting that poor sanitation and the crowded conditions within besieged cities were often far more deadly than any external biological agent introduced by attackers. In this view, the real agents of devastation within a besieged city were not the plague victims catapulted over walls, but the unsanitary living conditions, the scarcity of clean water, the accumulation of waste, and the close proximity of stressed, malnourished populations. These factors alone, historians argue, would have been ripe breeding grounds for disease, making any externally introduced pathogens merely contributors to an already catastrophic internal situation. This perspective does not necessarily negate the intent of the attackers, but it questions the efficacy of their biological agents compared to the inherent vulnerabilities of a besieged population, suggesting that much of the devastation attributed to deliberate biological attack might have occurred anyway due to the brutal realities of prolonged sieges. It forces us to distinguish between what was intended and what was truly effective, between the horror of an act and its actual impact. We scrutinize these compelling hypotheses, separating historical fact from persistent legend, unearthing the chilling debates that continue to surround these forbidden blights. The task is not merely to recount tales of gruesome warfare, but to understand the motivations, the knowledge, and the consequences that shaped these events. It's a journey into the moral ambiguities of human conflict, where the desire for victory often overshadowed any ethical considerations. The struggle to decipher intent from outcome, to distinguish between a desperate measure and a calculated act of terror, forms the core of this historical exploration. Each archaeological find, each reinterpretation of an ancient chronicle, adds another layer to this intricate puzzle, drawing us closer to the truth, yet often leaving us with more profound questions than answers. This profound journey into the shadows of ancient warfare challenges us to rethink our understanding of military history and the very nature of human conflict. It reveals an unsettling continuum in humanity's inventive capacity for destruction, a capacity that, even without the advanced science of today, managed to harness the invisible forces of disease. The echoes of these ancient practices serve as a stark reminder that the weaponization of biological agents is not a modern invention, but a terrifying concept that has lurked in the human psyche for millennia, emerging from the depths of desperation and strategic cunning. This exploration of our past informs our present, reminding us that the vulnerabilities of crowded populations, the fragility of health, and the ever-present threat of contagion have been battlegrounds for ages, a silent, invisible enemy often leveraged by human hands. What secrets do these ancient pathogens still hold, buried not just in the soil, but in the annals of forgotten warfare? And what crucial lessons can we glean from humanity's earliest, most gruesome encounters with weaponized disease, lessons that might resonate with startling relevance in our own complex and interconnected world?